Week 3 inches closer, and the biggest opportunity to propel their season forward belongs to the Washington Huskies this week as they play host to the 11th ranked Michigan State Spartans, and they're favored? Let's go.
Our Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin, D1 play-by-play broadcaster. Thank you for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your number one source to stay up to date with the Conference of Champions, which is why, if you have not already, please like, comment, and subscribe wherever you're listening to or watching the show. We're almost to 1,000 subscriptions on the YouTube channel. If we hit that before the weekend, I would be over the moon, but I'm grateful for all of your support of the show anyway, and I'm grateful to have Carter Bahns back once again, senior writer and editor at beaverblitz.com. We bring him on to talk Beavs and talk Pac-12. We'll go all around and we'll get to the Beavs later in the show today. But Carter, let's hop right into it. Washington has the biggest game so far of the Kalen DeBoer era by a long shot. So far, they've played Kent State and Portland State. And look, they've looked, to their credit, the way a good team is supposed to look against those opponents, and not everybody does. And the randomness of college football, I think, was demonstrated in their in-state counterpart, Washington State, who barely beat Idaho, go on the road, beat number 19 Wisconsin. I don't think anybody saw that coming. But how do you assess the opportunity that Washington has here playing host to the 11th ranked team in the country right now?
Yeah, this is an opportunity for Washington to prove that, what it did against lower competition wasn't just all right here, we're actually a good team. They've got an opportunity against, like you said, one of the top 11 teams in the country right now who has played very well in Michigan State. Mel Tucker getting an opportunity to come back west and play against a Pac-12 team, of course, after that not so pretty breakup at Colorado, which I'm sure we're not previewing any Colorado games this week, unfortunately, with the way
well,
that
they're a 27.5
played.
point underdog against Minnesota last time I checked.
Yeah.
So I think the Buffs are praying that game just doesn't get way out of hand. But if it does, the pressure on Carl Durrell shall intensify. But a conversation for another day. Continue.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just saying it's an opportunity for Kalen DeBoer very early on in his tenure to pick up, I don't know if we would call it a signature win, but certainly a big win, and one that would prove that Washington's not rebuilding. It's ready to compete against high-level competition right away. So I think it's, not only a big game for Washington as a team in 2022, but it's a big opportunity for Kalen DeBoer to say, no, we're here. We're not working our way back up. We're ready to play right now.
Yeah, I think you'd put the rest of the conference on notice, and certainly they'd slide into the top 25 should they win, which would be great for the conference because the number of ranked teams right now is currently sitting at 3, and you'd love for that number to be closer to 5. And Oregon, of course, is teetering, and I frankly was surprised the Ducks got back in the top 25. Yeah, you look the way you should against Eastern Washington, but you look the way you shouldn't have against Georgia. It is only number 25. I don't know. That was a little surprising to me. But another thing that surprised me with regards to this Washington game, Huskies 3.5 point favorites right now. That is a lot of respect, and I understand the offense is humming. They're going up against a different animal in Mel Tucker's Michigan State Spartans, of course, and Washington has looked fluid. They've looked good literally from the first play of the season when they started with an interception against Kent State. Penix is healthy. He's throwing the ball well. He's connecting with receiver. Like, there have been a lot of really good things for this Washington team so far, but are you surprised that they're not just favored, but by over a field goal at home against Michigan State? Maybe the Spartans have taken a step back from what they were a year ago when they were an 11-win team, but I saw that, and it's holding steady there right now. That surprises me. Like, I'm not ruling out Washington entirely in this game, but I think Michigan State will be able to get it done, and that's a big, big number to me.
I'm curious where that comes from because, I mean, anytime you see a 3-point favorite and it's the home team, you say, all right, well, that's just home field advantage. So Vegas essentially is saying that these two teams are equal. And there's nothing about the resumes that suggest right now. I mean, Washington has to go out and prove it. Everybody, I think, is expecting Michigan State to come in and at the very least give them everything they want. So yeah, 3.5. I mean, I'm not going to lie. When you said that, I had to pull up Michigan State's results and say, okay, is there something that I'm missing here? And I wouldn't say a 52-0 win over Akron necessarily suggests that you should be an underdog, especially if you're, the 11th ranked team in the country. I know they're going on the road, and Washington, by all accounts, looks like a good team in 22. But no, I don't see anything in this game that suggests that the Huskies should be favored. But I really think that they should be, like heavy underdogs here. I think it's going to be a good game, and I think Washington's going to put up a pretty strong fight, if not win this thing outright. But I would certainly not go on the record and predict Washington to win by 3 points.
Yeah, it just was surprising and is making me kind of dig around and look at this game and the matchup and such and ask, like, what does Vegas know that we do not? Like, I've seen people who cover the Huskies who are even surprised, like, wait, Washington's favorite, and maybe they're just giving all the credit to, kind of a long trip for Michigan State coming from East Lansing. It's going to be probably a sold out crowd in Seattle because they're 2-0 and optimism is running high right now for the Huskies football program. It's a huge game, and I would think that's a major part of it because I think even if you assume, which we can because we've seen them perform against competition similar to what they faced last year and perform better, at least in the 2 weeks we've seen so far. If you assume Washington is a better overall team, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily on Michigan State's level. And look, maybe they lost Kenneth Walker, the running back from a season ago. I'm not sure what other notable losses they've had. Maybe that's where it's coming from. Is that the markets are looking at Michigan State and saying, this team's overvalued as the AP number 11 team in the country. I think it says more about them than it does about Washington in that sense. But other games around the Pac-12 that are interesting this weekend. BYU travels to Oregon, where, again, what does Vegas know that we don't, Carter? I just 3.5, 4-point favorite for the Ducks here at home. Now they have a 20-game home winning streak, which is certainly a part of it, but BYU's coming off a great win against a good Baylor team, the reigning Big 12 champions, who returned a good amount of production and have a filthy defense, but the Cougars' defense held up well. I was also surprised at that, but what do you think this game means for Oregon and the Pac-12 having a top 15 team coming into Autzen? Like, what does that game mean for the Ducks, win or lose?
Yeah, I think it's the biggest game, not only within this kind of section of its schedule, but also for the Pac-12 this week. I think this game not only has the potential to be the closest, just best game to watch, but I think it's an opportunity for the Pac-12 to say, hey, we're still a top tier conference, still better than the soon to be Big 12s and the independents out there. I think it's an opportunity on a national stage for the Pac-12 to make a statement and for Oregon to say, hey, that 49-3 loss that we just had, in prime time against Georgia, not that team. We're more of the team that just beat Eastern Washington by 55 points or something like that. But I don't really have a great read on this matchup because I think BYU is very legitimately a top 15 team in the country this year. Obviously, beating Baylor is, that's an accomplishment for sure. Baylor's a very good team. I think Oregon isn't as bad as its 49-3 loss against Georgia, but it's not as good as the score might suggest. That it posted against Eastern Washington, and
Eastern Washington played horribly in that game. Like the Ducks did a number of things well, but the Eagles did not execute. Their quarterback had a bad day.
Yeah, and I think Oregon, you look at the final 10 games of its schedule, and I don't think we've learned anything about the Ducks through 2 weeks because, I mean, I don't think very many people expected them to be against Georgia, and I don't think anybody expected them to falter against Eastern Washington. So, I mean, Oregon could go 9-1 in its final 10 games, and I wouldn't be shocked. It could go 5-5, and I wouldn't be surprised. I just don't really know what to make of Oregon right now, given what we've seen from them through the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, I think that this is going to be the best barometer for what to expect for the Ducks the rest of the year. I agree with you on that. There's one more big time primetime game this weekend for the Pac-12. We'll talk about that after we tell you that if you want to bet any of these games, Bet Online is your number one source for all your pro and college football betting needs and sports info this season. Find all the latest football league developments, game matchups, news, and podcasts, including this year's opening week games and beyond. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including Major League Baseball. Go Mariners, baby. MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline is where the game starts. So, Cal is going at Notre Dame. And going into the season, I didn't have high hopes for this one. I still don't have tremendously high hopes, but I will say they've been elevated a little, not so much because of what I've seen from Cal, because it's an offense that I think could really struggle to score points on the road at Notre Dame against a team that is going to be playing ticked off because of how they've started. Marcus Freeman doesn't have a win as a coach yet. And I don't think the Bears are going to be able to get this done. The 10.5 point number, that might show up in the Pac-12 prime picks later this week because it's most intriguing, especially with that little half-point hook. But the Bears offense so far kind of been what I expected. Pretty underwhelming. Plummer will make a nice throw every now and then, but overall, they started slow against UC Davis and then eventually picked it up. And they only put up 20 points at home against UNLV. That's just kind of what I was expecting coming into the year. So far, it's played out that way. It's definitely more likely now, in my view, that Cal beats Notre Dame than it was going into the year off a loss against Marshall because the caliber of that Notre Dame team is just clearly not very high. They also just lost their quarterback for the year, and I've heard their backup is nothing special either. So how are you looking at this game in what will be a Pac-12 team that is playing on NBC, which doesn't happen, I don't know, ever, and it'll be Cal of all the teams, but it's a chance. I suppose Notre Dame plays USC and Stanford every year. So other than those two teams, not every day someone is playing on NBC from the Pac-12. How do you think the Golden Bears can fare here going into South Bend as 10.5 point underdogs?
Well, I like what you said about entering the season. We didn't necessarily think this game was going to mean a whole lot to the conference. I mean, I schedule going into the year and I'm saying, all right, well, Notre Dame's probably going to be a 3-touchdown favorite. That game's probably not going to be particularly close. We're going to say, oh, great, what an awesome advertisement for the Pac-12 on national TV. But now here we are after 2 weeks of the season, and you've got a 2-0 team and an 0-2 team, and that Golden Bears. And I don't think we would have predicted that going into the season. But, I don't necessarily know that Cal, that I would go out and pick Cal to win this game, particularly with the way that it struggled against UNLV. But, I mean, I think the fact that Notre Dame has struggled to the extent that it has so far, and obviously losing to the Thundering Herd, was just the most recent kind of disappointment in that program's
We
recent
are
history.
Marshall.
Great movie, by the way, with Matthew
Great
McConaughey.
movie.
No, just the fact that those two teams are trending in the way that makes it more of an intriguing matchup than we expected. But I still don't know if I can say, oh yeah, Cal's ready to make that step and beat Notre Dame, regardless of how much Notre Dame has struggled to start the season.
Yeah, you still have better players top to bottom on Notre Dame's roster. It's in South Bend, but you also have a head coach who's never won a game, and Justin Wilcox at least knows what it feels like to win a game as a head coach. And I was talking on yesterday's show with Mark Culkin of Locked On USC, and one thing he pointed out that caught my attention, especially with that 10.5 point number, is you've got a young, relatively inexperienced offensive coordinator in Tommy Rees, and you've got a coach in Justin Wilcox who, in my view, has shortcomings as a head coach, but I would hire him as my defensive coordinator no matter what team I was anywhere. I think he's really sharp on that side of the ball because he's built a top tier defense in the Pac 12 at Cal. And he's doing it without a bunch of. They haven't been sending a lot of guys to the NFL. There's an Evan Weaver every now and then, or a Good, the linebacker as well, Goode, not Good. But like they've had a couple decent players, but overall, I just watch his defenses and they're very well coached. They have a safety whose name is eluding me right now, who in the UNLV game and watching it was just popping off the screen with his speed. I tell you what, that's an interesting way to look at the game. Like Justin Wilcox against Tommy Rees, kind of feel based on what we've seen so far, especially now that Rees has got a backup quarterback. I don't think Cal's going to score a lot of points, but I don't know that Notre Dame is going to score a lot of points in this game either.
Yeah, so here's why the Golden Bears have been competitive for so long under Justin Wilcox, even though they haven't necessarily made that step and competed in the upper echelon of the Pac-12. It's because you can rely on a good defense to keep you in games. You know, if you are limiting the number of possessions in the game, you know, holding teams to 25 points or fewer on a regular basis, doesn't matter how bad your offense is, you're going to have opportunities to win that game. And I think that is why so often we've seen Cal around that 4 to 7 win range. It's just, you know, when you have beat teams that you're not expected to beat, but when you have an offense like that as well, you're probably going to lose to teams that you're expected to beat as well. And so I think when you look at a matchup against a team of Notre Dame's caliber, you say, well, that's a game where the defense can play up, you know, especially with Notre Dame scoring like 2 touchdowns against Marshall last. You know, Notre Dame doesn't look like it's going to set the world on fire offensively. You mentioned they're down to a backup quarterback. Maybe this is a game where Cal again relies on that defense to keep it close, and then all you need is a couple of scores, and there you go. You've pulled off the upset.
Yeah, it's a defense that is good year in and year out, really, in the Pac-12, and it bears itself out statistically. No pun intended with the Bears, and and also just the eyeball test. You watch them, and they don't commit a ton of penalties. Like, have you ever watched a Cal football game and the defense commits like 8 penalties for 70 yards and just gives first downs to the other side? Like, no, you're going to have to earn it, and they don't recruit at a high level and never really have as long as Wilcox has been there. I don't think they did with Tedford either, really. It's not something that they've just been able to do tremendously well, but they make the most of the guys they have on the defensive side of the ball. I think Jaden Ott is a nice running back and very versatile in the passing game. About the only offensive piece I really like that I've seen so far for the Bears, but I know that defensively that they've got guys up front who are physical and who are fast, and they are very, very well coached. It's what I always think when I watch Cal's defense. That's a well coached football team on that side of the ball, and I think Wilcox does that very, very well. Let's go to Oregon State now, and they had a great win over the weekend. The probably best game over the weekend, not necessarily the biggest, but it was one of them, and it was the best. It came down to literally the final play. Who else would have run it in but Jack Coletto? Because that's what every Oregon State fan wanted to see. Fresno State didn't know it was coming. I did get a kick out of, I think it was Antonio Cromartie was doing the color commentary on the game, and when Coletto came in, he predicted that this is going to be a fake run and Coletto's going to throw, and then he runs over the right edge, and then 2 seconds later, Cromartie said, I can't believe they didn't know he was going to run to the right. Everyone knows it's going to run to the right. And I was like, dude, you just said it was going to be something else, which was not a half bad thought, but like I just got a kick out of that. But regardless, Coletto just works. It does in certain moments. He's Taysom Hill of Oregon State's team, and people can rip on the Taysom Hill contract all they want, but you look at his stats on 3rd and 4th and short, he's really, really good, and that's a really critical situation. So aside from that particular play where Coletto came up big for the Beavs, how did you feel Oregon State played on the road, winning at Fresno State for the first time in program history?
There's value in a player like Jack Coletta who, may not set the world on fire in one particular thing that he does, but when he's reliable in short yardage situations, you use him. And when he is a very solid backup linebacker, you use him. And when he is a special teams threat, you use him. And comes out and pulls off one of the biggest plays, I think, in recent Oregon State history with that game-winning touchdown. And I think Oregon State played about as well as I expected them to play. I think Fresno State got what I expected it to get against the Oregon State defense. The game followed the close matchup kind of prognostication that it received, not only from Vegas, but I think from pretty much everybody who picked the game. I thought it was going to come down the final possession. Sure enough, it did. But overall, I think just a big win for Oregon State. Not necessarily program defining, but to go and beat a very good team, a 10-win team last year, who I think is, probably going to be close to that again this year, on the road where you've never done it before, to do it in that fashion where Jonathan Smith says, no, we're not playing for the tie. We're here to win this game. And you do it. Not program defining, but a huge win for Oregon State, which is now 2-0 and looks like it is ready to make that leap and compete for. I don't know. We'll see if Pac-12 titles in the cards once it gets to conference play, but it's going to compete for 8 or 9 wins.
Yeah, and when you and I went through their schedule prior to the season, we both had them going 2-1 through these games, which I think would have been just fine. Like if you're Oregon State, assuming you don't stumble against Montana State at home this week, which I do not foresee in any way, shape, or form with how they're playing right now. If you'd been 2-1 going into conference play, I think Oregon State fans probably would have taken that, right? You would have felt good, whether it was beating Fresno and losing to Boise or beating Boise, losing to Fresno, like whatever, that was going to feel good. But now it's kind of that situation of you wanted your team to get to a certain level and they got above that level. And normally you thought, well, maybe we'll just be content that this happened and we got a little bit above it. But now that you see what's possible, I feel like in the minds of Oregon State fans, Carter, the expectations are now, yes, 7 wins is like the bare minimum. Whereas going into the year, 7 wins would have been, all right, that's okay. That's solid. Would have liked to see 8 or more. But now that you're probably going to be starting 3-0 with this win against Montana State, I think you got to look at this team as a Beaver fan and say, man, I expect 8 wins at least here.
You're exactly right. I mean, when I came on this show and I picked a 7-win season, I said, I think Oregon State's going 2-1 in non-conference. I think it has the potential to win all 3 games, but I can't predict it because Boise State and Fresno State were picked to win their divisions in the Mountain West. Oregon State flat out dominate the Broncos, I think, in week 1 and to go on the road in a hostile environment and win a game that was a toss-up and kind of a prove-it game. Okay, are you really this good kind of game? I think the Beavers potentially at 3-0 to start the year, 7 wins would be a disappointment at that point. You look at some of the coin flippy type games later on down the season, and I think you have to give Oregon State, the edge in a lot of those if you were to go and predict win totals at this point in the season. And so I think 8 or 9 wins is probably the expectation in the fan base right now. I know a lot of fans were hoping for 8 or 9 before the year even began, but to start the season this way and to get 2 tough wins early on in the year, I think that sets things up pretty well for this team.
Yeah, I had them 8 wins coming into this season, and I feel really good about that prediction right now. And the other thing, if anyone listened to us at the time, then you missed out on it, unfortunately. But regardless of what specific number we were predicting for the Beavs going into the year, we were both taking the over of 5.5 easily, and that they're going to be at 3 through 3 weeks, and that's about as good as you could hope. Let's assume that happens, and let's assume USC mops the floor with Fresno State, which they probably will, because I don't know who's stopping that offense right now, and the answer is certainly not Fresno State at this point in time. That sets up a Week 4 showdown in Corvallis, top 10 USC, going on the road to play Oregon State. Where have I heard that story before? I'd have to go into the memory archives to think about it. But that game right now, Carter, and I don't think it's going to change because I believe it's been officially announced, is going to be on, checks notes, the Pac-12 Network, which is number one surprising because USC is the flagship brand in the Pac-12. Everybody knows that. I think of it a little bit like Gonzaga basketball in the WCC. They're the biggest team there. Every single game Gonzaga plays is on ESPN in some form or another, right? Whether it's in conference or out of conference, they're always on national TV because the WCC wants to get their biggest brand out there. The Pac 12 is not only going to be hiding USC next week, but they're also going to be shielding a lot of people from having to watch what could be a really good football game and a potential statement win for the Beavs if they pull the upset. I think Oregon State is getting absolutely screwed there.
The only reason that this game's on the Pac-12 Network, I think, is because all of the Pac-12 teams are required to be on that channel 3 times this year. And ESPN and Fox are kind of betting on US in the latter half of the season, which makes sense, fair enough. But I don't think you can look at this game and say, well, this isn't a big game for USC. I mean, you're going to have probably a 3-0 Oregon State team that's going to be knocking on the door of the top 25. It'll probably check in, as the 4th highest vote getter that didn't make it.
They're already getting votes right now, as they should be.
Yeah, they're, I want to say like 33rd right now or something like that if you extrapolate out, the vote tally. But no, it's a borderline top 25 matchup that features a top 10 USC game, and that has ESPN primetime written all over it. I mean, look this week. USC went on the road to Stanford, who I don't think anybody really expects to be like particularly great, and that got the 4:30 ABC time slot. And so I don't think you can look at this game and say, well, no, that's any worse than the matchup that they just featured, in the best time slot they have. I'm not saying Oregon State USC should be, like a prime time, nationally televised ABC, network TV type game. But there's no way it should be stuck at 6:30 on the Pac-12 Network where nobody's going to see it. Because like you said, not only is it a big game for USC, but potential to be a really great game. The line of this game is probably going to be set somewhere in the 3 to 5 range, if I had to guess, based on the way the lines in the Pac-12 have been set this week. I don't think Vegas is going to particularly love the Trojans in this matchup going on the road against a good team, to just be a classic in what is probably USC's last trip to Corvallis, a place that it has struggled as a top 10 team in recent history, as you mentioned.
I would imagine the thinking for having Stanford USC in that primetime slot is, number one, it's USC, and it's the first Power 5 opponent for Lincoln Riley. And then the team on the other side is Stanford, and the Bay Area is a bigger TV market to tap into than Oregon State. Like, that's probably why, but I just saw that game, and I agree with you. I don't think it's necessarily because the Beavs may or may not even be in the top 25. If I had a vote, I'd probably give it to them if they were 3-0, but at this point in time, they might be just on the outside looking in. But regardless, I look at it and say, man, I think that's going to be a really, really good game. And it's USC, and look, maybe it shouldn't be because it's Oregon State on ABC in the primetime slot, but it feels like that should be an FS1 game. Like that. That's kind of what felt appropriate to me, and I saw that and thought, really? Like, I don't know if this is a holdover from Larry Scott's decisions or if this was made by this current administration and George Kliavkoff, but I'm with you that's kind of disappointing because if Oregon State pulls the upset, and think about it as well, if you're trying to sell a game to a particular network and say, yeah, you want to put this one on there, what does a network want to have for something like that? They want to have context. They want to have stakes. They want to have content to talk about beyond the game. You can roll the clips of Oregon State beating USC in Corvallis back in the day and frame that with the context of Jonathan Smith has been building this program up for the last 5 years, and it's been a steady, solid rise, and this could be the pinnacle win potentially. And we'll talk about this more next week, of course, but it just felt so Pac-12, like Oregon at Washington State. Yeah, I get it. It's Oregon, and more people watch, but and that will also probably be a very good football game. But the ramifications of Oregon at Washington State to me are not as significant as USC-Oregon State. And again, on USC's side, it's another chance to show against a Pac-12 opponent who looks to be a good team this year just how good the Trojans can be.
The storylines are there for sure. I mean, they can show the ESPN footage of Oregon State beating number 1 USC in 2008, and the fans storming the field and whatnot. I mean, that game was worthy of an ESPN primetime slot. Now, given it was on a weeknight, so it's a little easier to fit it in there. But it's the precedent has been set that this is a matchup in the past that has been nationally televised. And I look at some of the other games that got national slots in that week. Of course, that's 2 weeks out at this point. But there's an FS1 game that matchup isn't Washington, Arizona, I don't think, but it's that caliber of game where it's like a middle of the road versus kind of a bottom dweller. And I'm like, are people going to be tuning in? Is that going to be on TV in bars at 7:30 p.m.? Like, I think people would rather watch Oregon State and USC, who were, well, I mean, at that point, I think we both expect them to be 3-0, so they're playing to stay undefeated. It's a game that, if both teams reach the expectations and the goals that they have, it probably has Pac-12 title implications. Whether it's this team is Oregon State has the tiebreaker over USC because it beat it head to head, that kind of thing. I mean, this is a big game in a lot of ways, and I just think that it's a shame, regardless of the requirements for teams to be on Pac-12 Network or for however many other games ESPN and Fox had to choose from. I think it's a shame that this thing gets relegated to the Pac-12 Network in a 6:30 p.m. time slot.
Yeah, you got to find a way to make it happen, but such is the life for us as Pac-12 fans. Carter Bahns, senior editor and writer at beaverblitz.com. We will have him back on next week to talk about that game and more across our beloved Conference of Champions. Carter, good to talk to you, man.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate everyone listening. See you next time, and have a wonderful rest of your day.